Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today we are going to be talking about all of the series that I DNF'd, completed, started and have not finished, need to continue on with in 2020. So pretty soon you are going to be seeing my 2020 reading stats wrap up, and when you see that video you will realise that I predominantly read books in a series. So this is going to be a breakdown of all of the series that I've read, that I've started, that I've DNF'd in 2020, and we have 51 series to talk about today, which is 11 more than I had when I did this in 2020. I do make a mid-year check-in version of this video because of the amount of series that I had in 2020. I did split it into two parts. The first part was the series that I DNF'd, completed, and that were completed up to date, and the second installment was all of the series that I needed to continue on with. So this video is not going to be split down, it is going to be all of the series from 2020. However, if they are series that I have mentioned in those previous two installments, I will just be briefly mentioning them, and then if you would like any information about what I thought about them, why I DNF'd them, etc., then you can check out those two mid-year installments. So there are going to be 5 main sections in this video. The first ones we are going to be covering is the series that I've DNF'd. Next up, we will be going through the series that I've completed. Next up, we will be covering the series that I have completed up to date. So the series is not currently completed, but I have read everything that is available, and that will be split into two parts. The first part being ones that do not have a book scheduled for release in 2021, and the second for series that do have books scheduled to be released in 2021. And then we will be going through all of the series that I need to continue, and within that we will once again be splitting it down into ones that are already completed and I just need to finish the series, and ones that I've started that are not completed and still have further books to come. So as you can imagine, we have quite a lot to get through in this video, so I'm just going to be kicking it off right now with the series that I've DNF'd. So there are 6 series that I have DNF'd in 2020. The first 3 have been mentioned in that mid-year video, and they are The Raven and the Dove by Caitlin Davis. This is a young adult indie published fantasy romance series. I read the first book in this series, I will not be reading the rest, and this book actually made it to my worst of the year list. The second one is The Start of Me and You by Emery Lord. This is a young adult contemporary. I really enjoyed it, but I didn't feel like I needed anything more from the story, so I won't be continuing and reading the sequel. The last one I've already mentioned is Blood Heir by Amelie Wenzhou. This is an adult fantasy Anastasia retelling. I really didn't like it, and this one made it to my most disappointing books of the year. For the ones I haven't mentioned, the first one is All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. This is a young adult fantasy series that follows a girl who is a princess in this island kingdom, and to ascend to the throne she has to give a display of her power. However, when she is doing this, something goes horribly wrong and she has to escape her kingdom with a pirate. It is very much the plot line of Moana with the same kind of setting, because she has to find a way to save her kingdom, and she does this with this pirate's help. I gave this 3 stars. There were certain things that I liked about it, but I was just generally ambivalent. So while I'm not necessarily opposed to continuing on and reading the sequel, realistically I'm not going to go out, spend money on the sequel, and then spend time actually finishing the series off. So while I would if I had to continue, it's not something that I'm going to be putting any effort into. Then we had Infinity Son by Adam Silvera. You guys know this is my worst book of the year. I really didn't like this. It is a young adult contemporary fantasy that surrounds 2 groups of superheroes called Celestials and Spectres, and we are following 2 brothers who are obsessed with Celestials. They've always wanted to be Celestials, and when one of them does indeed develop powers, they are swept up into this world and this war between the Celestials and the Spectres. As I've already said, this was my worst book of the year, so I absolutely will not be continuing this unless somebody forces me to, which is quite possible, but of my own free will I will not be continuing this series. And the final one is one that I am quite torn about, but that is Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy. This is a young adult fantasy that follows a group of bone criers who are women that are tasked with ferrying the spirits of the dead to their final resting place, and to do this they have to kill their soulmate. So you have the perspective of a girl in here who is about to perform the ritual to kill her soulmate, and a boy appears who has a vendetta against the bone criers because he saw his father murdered by one. They get into an altercation and the girl is kidnapped by the boy, and there is also another main character in here who is the girl's best friend, who is tasked with getting her friend back. I really wanted to love this. This is my most disappointing book of the year because I really did think I was going to love this. It's pretty much fantasy romance, but I didn't. I just really was not attached to it. So while once again I wouldn't be opposed to continuing, realistically I'm not in any hurry to buy the sequels to this, and even if I did, I would definitely not be in any hurry to read it, so it's pointless and I might as well just write it off as a DNF. The next section is the series that I have completed in their entirety in 2020. There are 7 of these in total, 5 of which I've already spoken about, the first one being the Orange series by Ichigo Takano. This is a young adult contemporary manga series with a sci-fi twist and my favorite manga series of all time. We then have the Illuminate Files by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is a young adult science fiction series and another one that I've loved. We also have the Maybe series by Colleen Hoover, which is a new adult contemporary romance series. The Winter Night Trilogy by Catherine Arden. This is an adult historical fantasy series that is based on Russian folklore, and the second book in this series made it to my best books of the year list. For the ones I haven't spoken about in their entirety, we have the Confessions of Georgie Nicholson series by Louise Renison. This is my favorite series from childhood. You guys know the story by now. I read these upon release when I was a kid, and then when the final book was released I was in college and I wasn't as focused on reading anymore, so I never read the last book in this series. So since 2018 I have been rereading this series via audiobook so that I could finally read the last book in the series for the first time, and then I think it was last month actually I finally managed to do it, and I'm thrilled that I got there. It's a little bit of an end of an era, but I'm happy that this is finally done. If you are unfamiliar with this series at all, it is just a standard young adult contemporary coming of age story. It is told in diary format and it just follows this girl from the age of like 13 to 16 as she is going through puberty, having crushes on boys, having her first kiss, falling out with her friends and things like that. I gave the majority of the books in this series 5 stars. There are 10 books in total. I think I only gave 2 of them 4 stars, but the rest I absolutely adored. What I will say though is that don't necessarily pick up this series on my recommendation because it is incredibly tinged with nostalgia for me, and it was very unlikely that I would dislike these books at all just because of all of the memories and stuff that I have attached to them. We then have the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in Robin Hobb's extended Realm of the Elderling series, which is what my book club, Catch Up Book Club, are currently tackling. We are currently in the second trilogy, which will come a little bit later on in this video. And if you are waiting for more information on the second phase of this, then my announcement video will be coming at the beginning of February, so keep your eyes peeled for that. So this is an adult epic high fantasy series, and in this first trilogy we are following a boy called Fitz, who is the bastard son of the prince in waiting. One day he's dropped off on the door of the keep and his maternal grandfather wants him to go back to his father because he's had enough of him. However, Fitz's father, Prince Chivalry, finds out that Fitz is on his way to him, and in his shame he abdicates and moves to the countryside, which means that nobody really knows what to do with Fitz, and he is mainly raised by the keep stable master until the king approaches him and decides it would be a good idea to train him as an assassin. I absolutely adore this series. I think I gave all 3 of the books in this trilogy 5 stars. Really loved it. I adore Robin Hobb now. This is a very slow moving character driven story. We are in Fitz's head for the entire time and he is very much focused on things that immediately concern him. He is quite young at the beginning of this. I think he's around 6-7 years old, and we follow him up until the age of about 16-17, so he's very focused on things that directly affect his life, even though there is this like big underlying plot that is actually a threat to the kingdom. And because of that, it can be a little bit frustrating to read from Fitz's perspective, but he is a very lovable character who has a lot of terrible things done to him, and throughout this you just really want the best for him even though things are going terribly wrong at all times. So I think my favorite book in this trilogy was the last one, Assassin's Quest. My least favorite one, which I don't really have, would probably be Royal Assassin, but Fitz is a character who continues on through the Elderling series. There are 3 full series within the Realm of the Elderlings that follow Fitz, and very soon I'm going to be going into the second series that follows him, and I'm really excited to see how his character develops from where we start, where he's a child, right up until the end of the Elderling series. And then the last one that I completed is is the Monsters of Verity duology by V. Schwab. This made my most disappointing books of the year list. I did put the first book in, but it was just like the duology in general. This is a young adult contemporary or like almost dystopian fantasy series that takes place in a world that is overrun by monsters that have been born from violent acts. So we are following two main characters, Kate and August, in here. Kate is a human and her family run the north of the city and they charge their citizens for protection, and August is a monster and a Flynn. The Flynns run the south and they control the south of the city by actively going out and hunting monsters. This series had a ton of things that I typically enjoy. It had a really great world that I was interested in with this system of monsters and the different types of monsters. It had some really interesting side characters that could have had a lot more complexity and depth that they did have, and it also had a whole ton of grey morality. However, I'm just really ambivalent about this series. I think it is just a taste thing with me. If you guys like fast-paced stories that are half and half, character driven and plot driven, but don't really delve into the characters to the extent that they could, then I will think that you enjoy this. But for some reason I was just really ambivalent on this one. So now we are moving on to the series that I am currently up to date on. The first 5 are ones that I have read everything that is published so far, and there is no news of any sequels being published in the year of 2021. They may still be published in the year of 2021, it's just there's been no announcement, and on Goodreads it does not say that the publication date is going to be this year. The first 3 of these I have already spoken about, and they are Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is currently a duology. It was always thought to be a duology, and it is a young adult fantasy heist story, and the second series in the extended Grishaverse. The third book in this series I think is going to be published either in 2022 or 2023, but I do believe that a third book is coming. The second one is the Aurora Cycle by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is the second young adult science fiction series. I did believe that the third book was going to be released in 2021. The usual release month for this is May. However, I do know that J. Kristoff is working on other stuff and Amy Kaufman is working on other stuff, so it is very possible that they have taken a year break before they publish the final book in this trilogy. As on Goodreads there is no name, no cover and no release date for this, and the release would be coming up fairly soon. We also have the Dark Shores series by Elliot Brooks. Elliot Brooks is a fantasy booktuber. This is her first published book. I picked this up to support her. I really enjoyed it, but as far as I'm aware there is no news of a sequel as of yet. We then have the Villains duology by V. Schwab. This is an adult sci-fi story that follows Victor and Eli, who were friends in college, and they have set themselves the task of finding out what gives people extraordinary abilities, so essentially how superheroes are created. They discover that the way to do this is to have a near-death experience, and so they proceed to kill themselves and each other to give themselves powers. This story is told in 2 timelines. You have the first timeline where all of this is happening, and the second timeline is 10 years after that, where Victor has just been released from prison and him and Eli are now mortal enemies. I absolutely adored this duology. I really loved Vicious, but Vengeful I think just blew it out of the water. There's a lot of mixed opinions on that one, but I personally really loved it, and I'm really excited to see where the third book in this series is going to go. It has no release date at all yet. It is just something that we know is coming. I don't even know if V. Schwab is currently working on it, but based on what happened at the end of this, I think I know something about one of the characters, and I'm really interested to see how that is going to develop. As well as that, there is something called Extraordinary, I think, that is going to be released in this series this year, but I think that that is a novella because it's a 1.5 installment. Regardless, I will be reading that. However, as for core installments in this series, as far as I'm aware, there isn't going to be one in 2021. And the final one for this category is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of the books slash series in his Cosmere, and this one is the story of 2 sisters. One of them is destined to marry the God King. These 2 countries are at war and they have this deal where the daughter will go to marry the God King. However, at the last minute, the princess's father changes his mind because he thinks his eldest daughter is too valuable, so he sends his youngest one to go and marry the God King instead. I really enjoyed this book. If you are new to Brandon Sanderson, it is a good one to go in at. However, if you are interested in reading the Cosmere as a whole in the order it's intended to be read, then this would not be your starting point. There is also a romance in here as well that I really enjoyed the world, as I usually did, and also the magic system. I'm quite attached to a few of the characters in this one as well. And the sequel to this, I can't remember if it's going to be published just before or just after Stormlight 5, but regardless, we still have a couple of years to wait before there will be another book in this series. Next up are the series that I'm currently up to date on. So I've read everything that is currently available. However, by the end of the year, I will not be up to date on all of these because they are all due to have a sequel published in 2021. There are 12 of these in total. 5 of them I have already spoken about. The first one being Charlie Travesty by KJ Sutton and Jesse Elliott. This is a new adult vampire romance that was published as a serial. So it was published in installments of around 100 pages each that make up this full book, and there will be another round of like 100-ish page installments coming in 2021. Next up is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is a young adult contemporary male romance story that is published as a webcomic. So volume 4 of this is going to be published as a bound book in 2021. However, if you go onto Tapas and read this webcomic, everything that is going to be included in volume 4 of this is probably already published. I just prefer to wait for the bound copies. We then have House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas, which is the first book in the Crescent City series. This was my favorite book of all time. It is the first book in an adult urban fantasy romance, and while I'm slightly dubious about this as I believe it may get pushed back, the second book in this series is currently scheduled to release at the end of 2021. Next up is The Court of Miracles by Kester Grant. This is a young adult fantasy Les Miserables retelling. If the sequel follows the same schedule as the first one, it will be published in summer. Then we also have King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first book in the Nikolai duology, which is the third series in the Grishaverse. It is a young adult fantasy that follows characters from the first 2 series in the Grishaverse, and the sequel to this is going to be published in March. Then we have Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyan. There are 2 books published in this series so far, with the final to come. This is a young adult fantasy story that follows a girl called Lay, who is forced to become a paper girl, which is one of the king's concubines. This world has a caste system, so you have the paper caste, which are humans. Then I think you have the steel caste, which are half human, half demon, and the moon caste rule society, and they are demons. This is an East Asian inspired fantasy. I really love the world in here, and we also have a female-female relationship. The world is definitely my favorite aspect in here. I don't love the characters, but I do really like Natasha Nyan's writing, the world building, and the way that she structured all of the politics, etc. in this. I didn't love the first book. I gave both books 4 stars, but it didn't leave like a lasting impression with me. However, I did continue and pick up the sequel in 2020, and I'm really excited for the conclusion to this series now. We then have The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This is an adult dystopian series that takes place in a futuristic version of London, and we are following a girl called Paige Mahoney, who is a clairvoyant in a world where it is illegal to be clairvoyant. Paige is the molisher for one of London's most influential crime gangs, and one day when she is on her way to visit her father, she exposes her powers and is captured. She thinks she's going to be killed. However, she is taken to this mysterious location where the world opens and a whole ton of new elements are introduced that I did not expect the first time that I read this. I started rereading this in 2019, and then in 2020 I reread the 3rd installment and also the novella The Dawn Chorus, and the 4th book in this series is going to be released in January. I do have an arc of it which you can see is just here, which I believe I'm going to be picking up next week, and then I will be back up to date on this series again. We then have Frostheart by Jamie Littler. I read the 1st book in this series in 2019, the 2nd book in 2020, and the 3rd and final book is going to be published towards the end of this year. This is a children's story that follows a boy called Ash, who is something known as a song weaver, which means that he can communicate with the monsters that live in the snow of this vast snowy landscape. The humans live in strongholds and they are scared of the monsters, so because of this they cast Ash out, and he ends up on board a Pathfinder sleigh where he decides that he is going to search for his missing parents, who left on a pathfinding mission a few years ago and then never returned. This isn't my favorite children's story, but I do find it quite heartwarming. In the sequel to this, I teared up at multiple points, and I'm really excited to see what the conclusion of Ash's story brings. We then have the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. I'm currently unsure how many books are going to be in this series. I believe that there could be up to 9. 3 of them have been published already. The fourth is believed to be published in 2021, but this is a children's story, which is my favorite children's story, which follows a girl called Morrigan Crow who is thought to be a cursed child, which means that everybody in her town blames her for absolutely everything that goes wrong, and she is cursed to die on the eve of her 12th birthday. When her 12th birthday rolls around, she is swept away to the magical city of Nevermore by a man called Jupiter North, who enters her into a series of trials to gain entrance into the Wondrous Society. I absolutely love this series. I think that the world building is so well done and it is so well written. It's a children's story that transcends age barriers, so I believe that there is a lot in here of value to adults as well as to children and young adults, and it's just a really lovely, imaginative story to read. My favorite thing about this is that the way Jessica Townsend builds this world is that it does feel quite real. Like, Nevermore is a place that you could access if you only knew how to, and it's not overly descriptive, it's not overly explained, but the way that Jessica Townsend writes it just makes it, to me, seem like a completely believable place. Next up is the Fortuna Swan series by KJ Sutton. This also made it onto my best books of the year list. This is a dark fairy romance story that follows a girl called Fortuna who is a nightmare, which means that she can make people believe that they are experiencing their worst nightmares. Fortuna's brother went missing 2 years prior to the start of this series, and she has been searching for him, but he has vanished without a trace. That is until a very powerful fairy male appears and tells Fortuna that he will take her directly to her brother, providing that she marries him. This is an indie fantasy romance story that I completely fell in love with in 2020, and I am desperate for the rest of the books in this series. There have been 3 books published so far. I gave all of them 5 stars, and the next 3 are to come, with book 4, Beautiful Nightmares, hopefully, assumedly, coming towards the end of 2021. We then have the Scholomance series by Naomi Novik, the first book being A Deadly Education. This is an adult fantasy story set in a magic school that is full of deadly monsters that are trying to eat the students. So in here we are following a main character called Elle, who nobody really likes. She's very defensive, very standoffish, and she is getting annoyed because the class hero keeps trying to save her life, and she believes that she doesn't need it. The class hero notices that Elle has a tendency towards dark magic, which is the reason why he's paying so much attention to her, and because of the attention he is paying, other people start to, and Elle decides to use this opportunity to try and build an alliance for herself to help her graduate, because to graduate from this school you have to fight your way out of a room full of monsters. This is a book that I enjoyed and hated in equal measure because I love the characters, especially the character of Elle, but I really don't like the writing style in here because it has endless exposition that just really took me out of the story. However, overall I do have very positive feelings about this. The sequel to this, The Last Graduate, is going to be published in June or July of 2021, and I am really excited to get my hands on it and continue. And then the last series in this category is the Kingdom of the Wicked series by Kerri Maniscalco. This was a 2020 release, so there is only 1 book published so far, but we have just had the title reveal for the sequel, which is going to be called Kingdom of the Cursed. This is a young adult fantasy series that is set in Sicily, and we are following Amelia, who has a twin sister called Vittoria. Very early on in this book, Vittoria is violently murdered, and Amelia, who comes from a family of witches, decides to dabble in dark magic to find out who killed her sister and to exact her revenge. And in the process of this, she accidentally summons one of the princes of hell. I didn't love the first 40% of this story, and I was worried that this was going to be a disappointment. However, from that point onwards, I really love this story. I love the setting. We have a lot of rich descriptions of things like food in here, Italian food, because Amelia's family owned a trattoria and she is quite invested in food and recipe creation and things like that. We also have a little bit of a romance, like an enemies to lovers style romance in here, and the ending of this completely shocked me because it took a turn that I didn't expect it to take, and then it took another turn which confused me even more, and I really want to know how that is going to develop and resolve in the sequel. And now we are going to be going through the biggest section, which is series that I have neither completed nor am up to date on, and I really am quite ashamed of this because I truly did used to be somebody who actively completed series, and I would not start a new series until I had finished the one that I was currently working on. So this is going to be split up into 2 sections. The first section is series I've started that are completed, but I haven't finished them. There are 13 of these in total, 11 of which I have already spoken about. So first up we have the Tyrant Soul series by C.L. Wilson. This is an adult fantasy romance series series. I believe there are 5 books in the series in total plus a spin-off series, and I have read 2.5. I put the 3rd one down halfway through in like May and then just like forgot to pick it up again. We then have the Books of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. This made it on my most disappointing books of the year list. This is a classic children's fantasy series. I was reading this for Le Guin along, however none of us were enjoying this, so we stopped reading it, and I'm not quite halfway through this enormous book. I'm at like this point, so I still have all of this to read, but in terms of the amount of books, there are 5 books in here plus a collection of short stories, and I have read the first 3 books. One that I'm not sure if it's completed, but I think it is the Dreaming Sun manga series by Ichigo Takano. This is a young adult contemporary or a shoujo manga. I'm not sure how many installments are in here in total. I think it might be around 10, but I have read the first 2. We also have The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman. This is a young adult contemporary fantasy duology, and I have read the first installment, so I just have 1 more book to go. Next up is Lifelike by J. Kristoff. This is a young adult sci-fi like dystopian steampunky series, and I have read the first book in this series, and the final one was published in 2020. Then we have The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This was a reread for me. I reread the first book in 2019, the second book in 2020. I really just need to finish my reread because Catching Fire made it into my most disappointing books of the year video, and this is a young adult dystopian uprising story. Then we have the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I have still only read The Final Empire, despite this being my second favorite book of the year. This is an adult epic high fantasy series. I know I'm gonna love it. It's just I started reading another series which is coming up soon, and because of the length of these books I just haven't managed to continue yet. We also have the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa. I'm holding the second book because I've lent the first one out to a friend, but the first book is Rhapsodic. This is an indie fairy romance series. There are 3 books and a novella in total, and I have read the first 2 books. We also have Oz the Complete Collection by L. Frank Baum. This is the children's classic story that The Wizard of Oz was based on, and I have not even finished this entire book. I've just read the first 100 and so pages of it, which is the original tale, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I think there are 10, 12 books in total. There's a lot. It's a really big series, but all of the books are quite short. Another series that I enjoyed what I read of it is the Daevabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. The final book I think was published in 2020, could have been 2019, but I think it was 2020, and this is an adult fantasy trilogy that is based on Egyptian mythology. I have read the first book in this trilogy and I have 2 to go. We also have The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This is kind of a standalone. It is an adult dystopian zombie story. However, there is another book that is tied to this called The Boy on the Bridge, which is either a prequel or a companion. So I have read this one and then I just have that other one to go. Then the ones that I haven't spoken about are Angel After the Fall. This is the first installment in the canonical Buffy comics. So there are lots of series in the Buffy canonical comics, and this is the starting point that takes place directly after the end of the Angel TV show. I'm a massive Buffy and Angel fan. I absolutely adore the series. I never thought that I would read the comics because I'm quite protective of Buffy and Angel and what I believe about that universe. However, I believe that I can keep everything separate. I'm just really curious as to what they did with the comics. So I can't remember how many installments are in the Angel After the Fall series. I have only read this first one, but I did order the second one and intend to read it in like September from Waterstones, and they just never sent it to me. It's one of those that they don't have in stock and have to order in. I never got it. I haven't continued with this series and the installments are quite hard to find, but when I have them I will actually prioritize reading them because they're short and I'm familiar with the world, so it's not like a taxing read. And the last of the series I need to continue with that are all fully published is The Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb. This is the follow-up series to the Farseer trilogy. This is an adult epic fantasy series. The main fantastical element in here is that there are these massive ships built of wizard wood, and when 3 generations of a family die on the deck of the ship, then the ship does come to life. We are mainly following the Bestrit family in here, who live in a town called Bingtown, which is known for these ships, and the story starts off where the patriarch of the family, Ephraim Vestrit, is dying. He dies on the decks of the ship, and the youngest daughter, Althea, has always believed that she will inherit the ship. However, due to the debt that the family has fallen into, the family decide to give the ship to somebody else. So one of the main plot lines in here is that Althea is trying to get her ship back and prove that she is responsible enough to run it. We also have other members of the Vestrit family who are dealing with like small town politics and everything going on in the trading town. There are a few other perspectives in here as well, but the only other main one I would say is that of a pirate called Kenneth, who is trying to be the next pirate king and has set his sights on a live ship as he believes this will help him achieve his goals. This book made it to my best books of the year video. I really love this series. I didn't think that I would love it more than the Farseer trilogy, but I really do, and I have read the first 2 books in this series so far, and this, as I've mentioned, is what my book club are currently working on. So the 3rd book, Ship of Destiny, is on my January TBR, and there will be a live show for it early February. And we are finally on the last section of this video. These are series that I have not completed, I am not up to date on, and they are currently ongoing. In the case of a couple of these, I'm not sure if they are finished or they are still ongoing. I'm assuming that they are still ongoing, and there are 5 that I've spoken about previously and 3 that I have not. The first one is the Rat Queens comic series by Curtis J. Weeb and Rock Upchurch. This is an adult feminist fantasy comic series. I've read 3 installments in this so far, and I have absolutely no idea how many have been published and how many are going to be like in the series as a whole. We then have the Tales of Erie-on-Sea, I believe is the series name, by Thomas Taylor. This is a children's fantasy story that focuses on the folklore of this creepy seaside town. There have been 2 books published in this so far, with another book coming in 2021, and I have just read the first installment. Similarly to Rat Queens, I have no idea how long this series is or whether it's still in progress, but that is Children of the Wills by Abby Umeda, and this is a young adult fantasy manga series. I've currently read, I think, 5 installments in this, and I own at least 5 more, but I'm not sure if there's any more than that. We then have The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. This is another indie new adult fantasy romance series. There are 2 books published in this so far. I have just read the first installment, and I believe that there are going to be 5 books in total. And then we have Serpent and Dove by Shelva Mihorin. This is a young adult fantasy romance series. There are 2 books published so far. I have only read the first installment, and I believe it is going to be a trilogy. For the ones I haven't mentioned, we have The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. These 2 books make up the first book, Way of Kings. This is the largest and most expansive series in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. This is an adult epic high fantasy series, and in here we are following a group of legendary knights who have to rise up again to tackle the oncoming apocalypse in this stormy landscape. It is a real slow burn series. There is a war between a formidable kingdom called Owlcrate, which is where most of the perspectives we follow come from, against this alien or fantastical race called the Parshendi on this massive landscape called the Shattered Plains, which is a series of like broken rocky plateaus. So in the first book we have a lot of the political stuff, a lot about the war, and then in the second book it is like more centered on politics as a whole, and in the third book, which I'm currently in the middle of, we have a whole lot more of the fantasy element. I'm really enjoying this series. My favorite book so far has been Words of Radiance, which is the second book. However, I do believe when I finish the third book that one will be my favorite in the series. I'm currently a host for the Stormlight read along, which is a read along of the books in this series, as the 4th book, Rhythm of War, was published in 2020. So I am going to be wrapping up everything that has been published in this series so far pretty soon. However, there have only been 4 core books and 2 novellas published so far, and it is going to be a 10-book series in total, and I have no idea how many novellas are going along with that as well. Next up we have Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is once again a new adult indie published fantasy romance series. I have read the first installment as of the end of 2020. However, I am currently halfway through the second installment. The 3rd book in this is going to be published in April, and then there is going to be a 4th book to come as well. So this follows a girl who is the maiden, and she is never to be touched, never to be looked upon. She can't experience pleasure, she can't talk to people, and she is going to ascend to the gods on her 19th birthday, and she has to be kept pure until that moment. Our love interest is a guard called Hawk, who has been tasked with guarding Poppy until her ascension, and I think we all know where this is going, but the fantasy elements in here are very ambiguous. You don't really know what's going on at the beginning, and there is kind of like a reason for that, and then the plot thickens quite a bit as we get towards the end. The sequel literally starts at the same moment that this ends off. I really liked this. I gave it 4 stars. I'm also really enjoying the sequel, and I cannot wait for the other 2 books in this series. I'm really loving it. And the final series we are going to be talking about today, finally, is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in a young adult sci-fi series which follows a girl called Spencer who would very much like to attend flight school. However, she is the daughter of a deserter, so everything she wants to do in life is kind of blocked because her father is known as a coward. Her family aren't even allowed to have any real jobs because of this, but all Spencer wants to do is fly, become a pilot, and fight in this ongoing war that her people have with an alien race. There are 2 books published in this series so far. I have only read the first one. I very much enjoyed it. It took me a while to get into it, but by the end I was really loving it. I teared up at multiple points, and I think that the 3rd book is going to be released in 2021. I'm not sure if that's the last book. I think it might be a 4-book series, but I am very excited to continue on with this one as well. So there you have it. Those are the 51 series I either DNF'd, was up to date on, completed, or still need to complete in the year of 2020. I have many goals for 2021. However, I'm not setting myself any strict ones because I know as soon as I do that, all I would do is feel guilty if I'm not accomplishing them. But one thing I would really like to do is to cut down on the amount of series that I have currently open. Hopefully by the time we get to the midpoint of the year, but definitely by the end of 2021, I will have significantly less series to talk about because I do really love reading series. I'm much more attached to the characters and the plot if I'm reading a series as opposed to a standalone. However, especially with Bookopoly, I just keep picking up new exciting things instead of continuing on with the things that I've already started. So a big goal for 2021 is going to be to actually read a lot of these series in their entirety, and also going forward from there, try and actually start and complete series within a reasonable amount of time. But that is it for this video, guys. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these, what you thought of them. Do you guys predominantly read series? How many series did you manage to finish in 2020? But aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.